You're listening to the Pink Tax podcast, where being a woman costs more and we've got the receipts. From overpriced razors to underpaid roles, we're talking money, power, and the price of showing up. Let's get into it. So welcome back to another episode of the Pink Tax podcast. Today, I am so excited to be joined by one of my dear friends, but also an incredible author. Fotini Iconomopoulos has over a decade of working with 170 different industries. And these are companies like Ford, Microsoft, Purina, Rolls-Royce, Walmart. And she has worked with them to help them through high-stakes negotiations. And her book, Say Less, Get More, has absolutely changed my life and changed the lives of so many people around the world. She also has taught MBA negotiations in Toronto and been recognized as a top 40 under 40 award recipient. So thank you so much for joining me today, Fotini, and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, my friend. I'm thrilled to be here.
So we talk a lot about negotiation, and I think I want to start right at the very beginning because I think people often feel like negotiation is something that's really, really scary, or you only do when you're negotiating like a job offer. So can you maybe dispel a couple myths around negotiation and when we actually need to be using these skills?
Well, anytime you're in conflict with someone, anytime they're not 100% on board with what it is you're saying or doing, you're actually negotiating with them. So if you want to be a leader in your organization and you want people to follow your ideas, if you want to be a leader in your community or in your household, you're negotiating with your peers, you're negotiating with your manager, you're negotiating with your employees, you're negotiating with your friends and partner and spouses and children and even your dogs to try and get them to go in the direction that you want them to go. That's the kind of the gist of it. So even if you're on public transit and you are trying to make sure that you maintain boundaries in your physical space, that's a negotiation in itself without even opening your mouth. So people negotiate more often than they realize, but they won't necessarily recognize their success with it or know how to translate that into those more daunting situations that they already associate with negotiation.
Right. And I think you tell this story at the beginning of your book, and I know that you've used these negotiation skills since, but you share a story around negotiating healthcare. And I think sometimes when we're at least in Canada, we think, oh, healthcare is universal, it's covered. We wouldn't need to negotiate like a bill. Can you share a little bit about how you've been successful in negotiating around healthcare specifically?
Yeah, I mean, in Canada, because we have this universal healthcare, I don't have to open my wallet when I go to an emergency room or go to the doctor. But in the book, I talk about my trips to the emergency room because of a deadly nut allergy. And that theoretically should move me to the top of the list when you're in anaphylaxis. But even then, I'm negotiating with the intake person to get things done a little bit faster. I'm negotiating to get behind the curtain faster. I'm negotiating to get brand name versus generic drugs that I know work better for my system. When I'm doing something that's less urgent and I'm negotiating with my doctor to get a procedure done, to get tests done. It's not a bang your fist demanding you must do this. I pay taxes and therefore I pay your salary. It is a walk me through how it would work if this. If the consequences are going to be X, Y, Z, what can we do to prevent X, Y, Z in the first place? It's asking really great questions to get the care that you need, to get the attention that you need, and to get the acknowledgement that you need in the first place. And that acknowledgement is sometimes really hard to do, especially when you are extremely emotional about it. And that's something the more personal it is, the more emotional you are, the more autopilot mode you get into, the less self-control you have. Those are the circumstances where they're the most challenging of negotiations. And it has nothing to do with money. It is your well-being and your stress levels on the line.
And, I think you hit on an interesting point there is oftentimes, I think, when people are negotiating or what they've seen in movies or read in books prior to maybe reading your book, they see negotiation as this high stakes, high conflict, pushy, aggressive situation. And I think that actually hurts a lot of women. And I know that your book has a bit more of an approachable method to negotiating. So can you maybe chat or talk to how women can navigate being perceived or being scared of being perceived as pushy or difficult when they're negotiating?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about expectation management. And if our expectation of women in society is that we're going to be warm and fuzzy, we're going to be generous, we're going to be, bending to everybody's will and accommodating to everything. The second you ask for something, the second you demand something, the second you put up a boundary, that kind of does mental gymnastics for everyone's expectations of women in general. And so that is what can contribute to that perception of aggression, rude, greedy, any of those things. And we know this by default. I mean, we know it based on tons of research too, but every woman I know has some type of experience with this, whether it's firsthand or secondhand, where they've been called rude, aggressive, greedy, any of those things. And so because we know we have to deal with people and we don't want to damage relationships, we either refrain from negotiating altogether, or we end up negotiating in a way that's not necessarily as self-serving as it should be, because we have to be considering all the time what is sustainable. And if you can ask yourself that question, what is sustainable, then you can also ask yourself of the situation, is it sustainable for me to keep giving into these demands, to keep doing this extra load of work, to keep doing these things that people ask for me or expect of me? Or is it something that's going to lead to resentment, that's going to lead to me damaging a relationship because I don't want to see this person anymore, because I don't want to work for this person anymore, because I don't want to be in a relationship with this person anymore? That's not a sustainable approach. So we have to think a little bit differently about it and go, well, what is sustainable? And we also have to think about the three critical questions when it comes to the process of negotiation. So I always tell people, think about what's in it for them. And I think women do a really great job of this. It's putting others' needs first. It's making sure you are empathetic. It's making sure you're acknowledging the other person. And that's wonderful. But then I have to ask, am I becoming the victim of my own empathy? Am I putting my needs on the back burner too much for the sake of others? And in order to rectify that, I ask the second critical question, which is, what can they afford to do for me? What can they afford to do for me? Can they afford to give me extra time for this task that they're asking for? Can they afford to take something else off my plate? Can they afford to give me some kind of resource that I need in order to move this, this ask forward? Can they afford more time, energy, stress level, flexibility, whatever it is that's going to make my life a little less stressful in order to make this work? And then we have to factor in the third critical question, which we've been misled on for such a long time. These examples of that Wall Street bro, bang your fist on the tables type of stuff that we've learned by trial and error and by a lot of research doesn't work for us. Now, the third critical question is going to actually address that. And it's, how are you making them feel? If you're making them feel belittled, if you're making them feel like they're being condescended to, if you're making them feel like you are being demanding on them, those are the things that are not going to go over so well. But if you make them feel like they have some autonomy in this, if you make them feel like they're a helper, if you make them feel like they're a rock star for doing something that's actually good for you, then all of a sudden you get a very different result. So if I'm trying to get my nieces to eat their vegetables and I ask the question, well, which would you prefer? Would you prefer the cauliflower, the broccoli, or the carrots? I'm making sure I'm getting what I want out of it. I want to get the vegetables eaten, but I'm making them feel like they can have some sense of autonomy and they're choosing their own destiny. I'm knowing that what can they afford to do? Well, they can afford to eat a freaking vegetable. They can afford to do this without fighting me on it. I know they've done it before. I know there's a history of it. I know they're not allergic to it. I know there's no vomiting involved when they do these things. So I'm thinking, well, this is certainly something they can afford to do. Well, what's valuable to them? Have I given them a reason to want to eat the vegetables? Maybe I need to start with something like, hey, you know how you like going to the park and climbing, the jungle gym and stuff? We get that energy from healthy foods like vegetables. So which vegetable do you prefer? Do you want the cauliflower, the broccoli, or the carrots? I'm making them feel like they're making a winning choice for themselves as opposed to me literally or figuratively shoving something down their throats. So it's, how can we adjust our strategy? How do we adjust making them feel acknowledged, making them feel like it's their choice? But we're controlling the conversation because we're asking really strategic questions, and we're putting something on the table that we know is going to serve us. We're thinking about what can they afford to do for me right now. It's really balancing those three questions that I think are pivotal to success in negotiations, particularly when it comes to women, because those feelings are preloaded with bias. They're preloaded with some kind of expectation attached to us. So how do I use that to my advantage in some way?
Yeah. And I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, especially as a mom of a toddler, the negotiations tend to happen multiple times per day. And when we can kind of give them what they believe is maybe a choice, usually they're more likely to do it. But when we think about not negotiating or not, engaging in some of these conversations, it costs women a lot of money. We've talked a lot on this podcast already, and I will continue to do so, about, the wage gap and the wealth gap. And one thing that really stuck out to me in your book was you talked about retiring early because you've been able to negotiate certain things in your life. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? I think you said, was it 8 years earlier or 20? I can't remember.
Well, according to the study, this was now over a 20-year-old study where they looked at those who did negotiate their salaries managed to increase their offers by an average of over 7%. And another study took that and said, okay, if we compare the people who did negotiate their first salaries versus the people who didn't negotiate their first salaries, and we make the rest of their careers exactly the same. So for the next 35 years, they get the same promotions, they get the same salary increases. But that first initial negotiation, the one that a whole lot of people walked away from, that 7% increase in salary results in 8 years of early retirement, thanks to compound interest and all of these other things. We're not factoring in negotiating every other salary increase in the next 35 years. We're just talking about that first initial one. And when I think about that, I'm like, well, I negotiated more than just my first salary increase. I've negotiated every single salary I've ever had. And as a self-employed person, I'm negotiating for services. I'm negotiating with clients. I'm negotiating for my mortgage. I think I've negotiated 4 or 5 mortgages now. I've negotiated for my homes. I'm now, this is my 4th home in my lifetime. I've negotiated rent. I've negotiated all of these other things. So my conservative estimate is that I have saved myself at least 20 years of early retirement. So that's what we're walking away from when we're too scared of damaging relationships. And if I am not a living example of wonderful relationships that have resulted in me actually starting my own business by request, by writing a book by request, by becoming a professor at a university by request, it's all because of relationships. So you can get what you want, and you can not just protect, but you can build better relationships, and you can retire early if you just think really carefully about what you were saying and doing instead of going into that autopilot mode out of fear.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, there's so many different things we can negotiate. And I'm always a big advocate for negotiating, especially the things that cost you a lot in life, right? Your house, your mortgage, your car. If you can, get $10,000 off something like that, you are, leaps and bounds ahead of someone who is not maybe doing that, or hasn't, questioned the bank even to see what they can offer you. I mean, insurance is another one where you can shop around and you can see what options you have there. Now, I remember when I was in the corporate space, I actually found out that one of my male colleagues that I was training was actually making more money than me. And I think with an increase in some of the pay transparency laws that we're starting to see in Canada, which I'm obviously very, very happy about, I wonder, do you have advice for someone, usually a woman, who maybe found out she was making less money than her male colleague? Because I think sometimes our first response, and mine was too, is you're angry about it. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, what do you do with that? What do you do with that anger? And how do you turn that into something that's productive?
Yeah. And it's really hard, again, when you're really emotional about something, to have the self-control to do what is most appropriate for your circumstances. And I understand where that comes from. So I'd say that my first piece of advice for anybody is take a breath before you say or do anything that you're going to regret. Plot out what your appropriate next steps are. And they come in 3 phases. I talk about the 3 Ps in my book. I talk about power, people, and process. So the first thing you need to think about is power. How much power do you have? Where does power come from? Power comes from knowledge. What do you know? What do you need to know? What do they need to know about you? So is it something like, do you know how they compensate? Do you know what the pay structure is like? Do you know how they're making decisions? Find out that information, ask really great questions to figure out, how did we get to this place, to this place in the first place, so that I know how to format my conversation around it so that I can sort of trap them into a solution-oriented conversation. I can't do that without the appropriate knowledge and making sure they know how much knowledge I have in that power. The same thing happened to me when I was in the corporate world as well. I have asked the appropriate questions, and I've asked things like, how do we compensate here? What are bonuses dependent on? How do we measure what does success look like here? When you have those answers, now you use their information to your advantage. You can quote them based on what you said here, based on my knowledge of our pay structures, based on these 10 things that I've done that contribute to what you say you reward. How do we make sure that this gets to the place where it needs to go? So during that conversation, that power conversation, I found out in my circumstance that they didn't even know some of the things that I had actually done. They didn't know that I brought in that client. Someone else was taking the credit for that. But I had the emails, the backup, the conversations that led to that client win. They didn't know all the other things that I was doing. They had selective viewfinders on to see or not see some of those things. So you can catch them in that. They can catch themselves in a lie, essentially, when you are collecting power. So power comes from information, making sure you get all the information you need in the form of questions, making sure you give them all the information they need so that they know how wonderful you are, whether it's in the form of third-party testimonials, whether it's in the form of facts, whether it's in the form of, previous evaluations and so on. All of those things are going to be really important. Then you think about the people. Who are the actual decision makers involved? Who are those influencers? Who are the ones that are actually making the decisions? Is it the person who's delivering the message? Or is it the person above them, beside them, behind them that's saying something in their ear? How can you leverage those people? Can you, if they're not listening to you, can you leverage some other person to be in the rooms that you're not in, to be singing your praises, to be fighting some of your battles, to be asking the appropriate questions so you can collect the information that you need in the first place? Then when you've thought about the people and the power, you can go on to figure out what is the process? How am I going to map this out? Who am I going to ask the questions to? When am I going to ask them? What is the order of my questions going to be? How am I going to quote those people so that I can relay it back to them? But you need to have the conscious mind to be able to press what I call your mental pause button instead of getting heated in the moment. And so you need to find a way to keep accessing that pause button when you are getting to that place where you think you're going to do something emotional, so that you can rechannel that energy into something that's actually going to be far more productive for you. So it could be calming breaths. It could be positive mantras. It could be taking that excitement part of your brain that also operates in a place of fear and emotion and going, I'm so excited to show them what I'm made of. I'm so excited to prove to them that I'm worthy of something so much more. And maybe that's what you're repeating to yourself. You could even have something like a Post-it note sitting on your notebook in front of you. And I suggest you write things down saying, slow down, press pause, shut up. People will talk themselves into or out of something if you allow them the chance to do it. But if you're constantly filling that airspace, or you're getting emotional and thinking and talking at the same time, that's where it gets really dangerous. If you don't trust yourself to be quiet in those moments, write down some questions in advance so that when they say something inflammatory that you know is going to make everything bubble up inside you and you're going to want to lose control, ask them a question like, what do you mean by that? Walk me through how that affects this situation that we're talking about right now. Redirect the conversation on the path where you want to make it continue to go by just having those auto kind of questions ready to go no matter what they say. What do you mean by that? Is going to put them on the back foot. It's going to make them make a mistake rather than you make a very costly mistake in the first place. So there's lots of stuff that you can be doing, but it all starts with finding that mental pause button and then thinking through really carefully and calculated about how am I going to manage the situation to get the best possible outcome for myself. Not how am I going to feel really good in that moment to get something off my chest, but then regret everything later. There's two very different circumstances.
Totally. And if you've ever seen Fotini speak, she has these little I think you still have them, your little business cards with the red pause button on them. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Amazing. I keep thinking you need to get one of those made, like the Staples That Was Easy button. And then it's just like your voice on the pause button saying slow down or be quiet or take a second. Because I think that's something that we often forget to do. And, I know you have shared an example about this. When we bought our first house, we actually were negotiating on price with the seller. And we said, this is our last offer or whatever. And they said, no, what about this? And then we got on a plane for 3 hours, and kind of unbeknownst to us, they were negotiating against themselves while we were actually on that flight. And we got them down, I think, another $10,000 off the price of our house, just because we literally had no Wi-Fi on that flight and couldn't respond to them. But it was like a forced pause.
Yeah. It's I called my book Say Less, Get More for a reason. It's a forced say less moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in fact, just this summer, I actually helped my sister negotiate herself into a new house. And it was outside of her price range. And we knew based on the pricing and how long it had been on the market. Again, we thought about power. How much power do we have here? We knew it was something they'd be able to come down on. And so I used that cauliflower approach to this one. I said, this is what you're going to script for your real estate agent. Your real estate agent is going to say the following. Today, we're going to be making an offer on a house. It's going to have this number in front of it. I would prefer for it to be your house. Your house is fabulous, but I can't afford for it to have a different number in front of us. So if you're willing to come down to this number, I'm happy to take this conversation forward. We basically said, do you want the cauliflower or do you want the broccoli? I can go down the road to the other two houses that I'm looking at, or I can go to your house. Which do you want it to be? And they came back and they said, give us until 5 o'clock. And by 5 o'clock, they came back to the number that we needed.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. I love that approach. I feel like you could definitely sell a book of like literally negotiation scripts for different scenarios that you're in. So what happens though if you're unsuccessful in a negotiation? I know no can be a really challenging outcome for a lot of people, especially if it's something that they really want, or they're really pushing for that raise at work and the answer is, oh, we don't have the budget to do that. I think many of us have been faced with that. What do you think we should do, or how should we reframe when the answer is no?
When you hear a no, I want you to turn that into a power charging opportunity. Because even when you get a no, then it should be a trigger for you to ask the question, a how or a what question. Under what circumstances would that change? How could we make it happen? And so if they say we don't have the budget, when will we have the budget? What are the milestones that we need to see in order for us to acknowledge when we do have the budget? So now you're charging your battery. You're getting lots of knowledge. You're also making them more accountable. Whatever is coming out of their mouths right now, you can now use for the next phase of the negotiation, so that you get to say, okay, remember when you said that we need to hit this milestone? We're here we are at the milestone. So what is it going to take to make this budget thing happen? And if they start changing their tune, you now have learned a lot about their integrity. You've learned a lot about the circumstances, and you have a different decision to make. But at the very least, when they say no, either you find a workaround in the moment. No is actually an opportunity for power. So find out what's behind the no. What are the other opportunities? They're going to give you something. They're going to give you some kind of element that you can use to your advantage either right now or save for later. Maybe you're using that power at a later date. But you can dig in a lot further into what's behind the no so that you can make a better decision based on those circumstances. Are they saying no to you for what sounds like a legitimate reason, one that you can postpone for another date? Are they saying no and they're just being vague about what's behind the no when you ask questions? Well, that for me is a big red flag, and I might start looking at other opportunities there. It doesn't mean you're going to quit your job today, but you're going to have your eyes looking for something else that might come in a better context and a better time. But it's what's behind that no, and how can I turn it into a yes? Maybe today, maybe at another time. Is there a creative solution around it? I won't know that until I ask how do we work around this? What other things do we need to consider? What else is stopping us from doing this? What could we do that would change this scenario that you've just told me about? Those are the types of things that can transform a conversation either right now or at a future date.
And I mean, I think these skills you're talking about aren't just applicable, obviously, to the corporate world, as we're both entrepreneurs. But I think in the entrepreneur space, you are always negotiating with clients. You're negotiating with prospective clients. And, as a speaker, I'm sure you're negotiating all the time for different events that you're going to be speaking at. So I think, the tips here apply kind of everywhere. And that's one of the things I love most about your book, is it was written I think, for absolutely everyone. It wasn't just a certain group of people. It is their tools, their tricks, their tips that are going to apply, whether, again, you're negotiating with your toddler about eating carrots or you're trying to land a 6-figure client as an entrepreneur.
I mean, that's the hope, is that you can find a circumstance everywhere in which you're negotiating. So why not turn that into a more successful opportunity for you no matter where you go?
Absolutely. And again, I want more money in women's hands. We want to close that wealth gap and that wage gap. And we know that there's still so much work to do. And one of the ways that we can absolutely do that as individuals is by negotiating, whether it's your salary, whether it's that car purchase, whether it's that client. You can do things like asking for non-monetary items when you're negotiating. I think, one that I've used in the past is negotiating extra vacation days in my corporate job, because I think that that's a really easy yes for them, because it doesn't physically cost them any money kind of flowing out of their bank account. Do you have any other, maybe non-monetary examples that you have seen be really successful, both, I guess, in the corporate world and as an entrepreneur?
I mean, I've seen so many creative things happen over the years, both in my own negotiations and for the ones that I help other people out there negotiate. And it all starts with really one question. What else? What else can we do? What else can we do to make this sustainable? What else can we do to make this successful? What else can we do to enhance the experience for both you and me? And I think about that even when I go into my clients, even if they're paying my full fee, I'm like, well, what else can we do? What else can we do to make your experience even better? And maybe it's on-site book signing. Guess what that does? It costs me nothing, and it gets more book sales in my win bucket, right? It gets more book sales for me, which is great because it means more people are going to be talking about me. It means, maybe royalties down the road or whatever. But it really just means that both of us are going to amplify this opportunity, and it's going to result in something indirectly later. It could be any number of things that gets really creative. I talked to one client once and I said, here are the things that are important to me. It's important to me to get the word out about what I do. It's important to me to get on more stages. It's important to me for you to be successful at this so that you are amplifying and telling people, wow, we had this great training, or we had this great session with Fotini. And they said, oh, well, we have this list of conferences that happens all over the world in our industry. We can give you access to that list to find out what else is out there and so on. I'm like, well, that's super cool. And it costs them nothing.
And so helpful.
Yeah, super valuable knowledge to me. So, why wouldn't we share that kind of thing? And that was after we'd squared away, here's my fee and here's what they're paying. So it's like, what else could we possibly do to make this a more valuable opportunity for everybody involved? If I know that I can do something outside of just my fees to make you successful, maybe it's something like, I can give you a 1-page summary sheet. It takes a tiny bit of effort on my part, but it means it's going to be sitting on your intranet, or it's going to be sitting on someone's desk, or it's going to be a continuous visual reminder of what we just learned together. It means you're going to be more successful at it because it's stickier in your brain. That's a massive win for me, because you now become more successful. You're more proud of yourself. You're talking about your wins with people. You're now telling people what worked for you because you remembered something that I said 6 or 7 years ago. That was my last phone call this morning. It was someone who saw me in an audience, I think 7 years ago. And now I've got a result of that. Those things happen all the time. So what can I do to make you more successful? It's actually going to serve me in the end, but I know it's going to serve you right now. So it's about not just looking at what is that limited pie, but how can we grow the pie even more and find more, giant pieces of pie for everybody.
Oh, I love that so much, because I think, when we are planting some of those seeds now, we might not see what they turn into for a number of years. And that's like a perfect example of that. So kind of to wrap this all up, if there was one piece of advice you could give someone listening to this when it comes to getting started negotiating, like, how would you tell someone to start? What's the one thing they can do so that, it doesn't seem as overwhelming to walk into your boss's office and ask for a $10,000 raise?
I'd say for this audience in particular, ask questions. Just be curious. Ask questions about, what does it take to be recognized as a superstar in this business? What can we do to get me on the path for promotion? What are the milestones that I need to hit in order to get to XYZ? Just do a fact-finding mission. Just start asking questions. They're not seen as demanding. They're not seen as that bang your fist aggressive type of things. You're collecting information. You're charging your battery. You're becoming more powerful so that you can have that more informed conversation when the appropriate time comes. In the moment, if you're frozen, if you're operating out of a place of fear, ask a question and it'll give your brain a chance to calm down and think a lot more carefully. It'll put them on the other foot a little bit. It'll make you much more powerful in that conversation. So questions are going to be your easy button opportunity in those moments. If you're super uncomfortable negotiating, you're just asking a question. You're just having a conversation with someone.
Yeah, no, that's a great piece of advice. And I always find if I'm in a situation where I maybe don't know what to say next, either pausing or asking a question gives them an opportunity to speak, and you can kind of regroup in your head, or maybe you'll even get more information from the other side as well when you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how does it make them feel? It makes them feel great. It makes them feel acknowledged. It makes them feel listened to. It's good for their ego. All you're doing is asking a question. They feel fantastic about giving you the power to get what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Where can people find you? Where is a great place to connect with you? Obviously, your book is available, Say Less, Get More, kind of wherever books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, probably some indie bookshops too. But where else can people find you online?
And LinkedIn is a place where I hang out a lot. My DMs are open there. Instagram is a place where I spend a lot of time playing. Those are the two major socials where you can find me. But my website, of course, FotiniIcon.com. I'm going to get more stuff out there, and on YouTube as well. You'll see me loading a lot more stuff there in the next little while. So at Fotini Icon is where you find all the handles, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, even LinkedIn can recognize me there as well. So you're welcome to reach out in any of those channels.
I love that. And whenever Fotini is traveling, she also opens her question box on Instagram. So you can ask your pressing negotiation questions there. I often take advantage of that. And it's a fun way to chat with you and ask questions when you're facing a situation where you might want some advice on negotiating.
Yeah, I haven't done that in a while, so I have to remember to do that. But I do save a lot of those answers as well. So if you look at my highlights on Instagram,
amazing.
A lot of that stuff.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope everyone watching this enjoyed this episode with Fotini. I will make sure that we link all of the places you can connect with her and link her book in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Pink Tax. Thanks, Fotini.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode of The Pink Tax. Thank you for joining me on the front lines of financial fairness. Remember, understanding the cost of being a woman is just the start. Now it's time to demand your worth and build your wealth. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a step in dismantling systemic inequality and securing your financial future. If this episode sparked a fire in you, take a screenshot, tag us on social media, and share it with a friend who needs to join the movement. Until next time, keep your wallet guarded, your eyes open, and let's keep fighting for a world where pink is just a color, not a tax bracket.